Hey, it's Sam, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about some deeper hidden secrets and potentials of this recent eclipse and the eclipse cycle that we're in that relates to frustrations, especially like relationship frustrations, not just romantic, but the potential for some blow-ups with Mars being combust in Libra, which is a sign of relationships, but also just seeing through the false story that we've been telling ourselves throughout our whole life, but even just how we kind of spin into this intellectual, almost kind of like a rat in a maze. It's a very sort of deep habit that we have, and how this eclipse in Virgo can really help us see through things, and especially out of our delusions and illusions and projections. A lot of it around relationships, for sure, especially because of the Mars Libra connection, but also because we're experiencing this cycle in the midst of the Pisces-Virgo axis. Pisces is where we had the last full moon, and Virgo is where we just had the eclipse and the new moon. And so I say that this about relationships because in many ways, not just romantic relationships, it could be something like a job or something where we project a lot of illusion onto others, and this sort of desire to merge with our opposite. Again, for the most part, again, without being too politically incorrect or whatever, to just use typical gender stereotypes, like a man incarnates in the male body and he's trying to integrate the feminine. And the hardest thing to integrate is that feminine into his consciousness. Same way with a woman trying to integrate that masculine. And this is why we really project onto often the opposite sex, that sort of fantasy, sort of illusion, again, which is very much about Pisces. It's about Jupiter. Just in general, the idea of fantasy, illusion, projection are very big Pisces qualities. Virgo is sort of the opposite. It's like awakening from the projection, awakening from the illusion, and just seeing the literal details and getting the story straight, getting the story clear, which can happen on a micro and a macro level. So I'm going to be talking about those things, and particularly because we have Mars in Libra now, which of course Libra is the sign of agreements that we make. Again, not just romantically, but business relationships or just getting along with others. And Mars is combust there, and there can be this kind of frustration with others, Mars in Libra, based on confusing illusions that we have with them or had with them. Again, it doesn't have to be romantic relationships. It can be family members. It can be some longing that we have to integrate something, and it can feel quite disconnected, like this idea that, well, if only that were going on, boy, if I could bring that thing into my mind and life, then things would be great. But this thing is wrong because this person is not doing what they should do, and we have this whole story. This is Virgo, is that whole story that we have around it. It's very easy, again, to use romantic relationships or friendships or other type of relationships as a model. It could be a relationship with siblings or parents, or what difficult agreements that we've made with people. But it's very interesting how, if we use like a sort of romantic model, I've done a lot of work, or I've gotten a lot of inspiration from a thinker named Alison Armstrong, who has a great way of explaining the evolution of female and male identities around relationships. The female goes from the damsel in distress to the princess to the queen. The male goes from the knight to the prince to the king. These three very distinct stages. By the way, her work is so amazing. You could see how it also correlates to like the three gunas and other types of trinity arrangements. So you'll see that the paired opposites are like the knight and the damsel in distress. This is the immature young man and the immature young woman. The damsel in distress women will pretend to be the damsel to see the knight come to her rescue and recognize or think, oh yeah, the strong meaning like the man who will fight for me. And again, there's something very primal about these things. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're unintegrated stages. If that's the only stage you're at, and you haven't integrated, let's say, like the princess and the prince, who have grown beyond just the damsel in distress, because the princess now realizes that she also has power and sovereign. And what happens is, if the knight tries to, the knight will try to win the princess. There's a step removed, because the princess has passed through the damsel stage, and she can see that this is just a knight trying to impress her as if she's a damsel, and so the princess isn't impressed. She wants the prince. The prince shows up for the princess and says, "Oh, see what a prince I am. I'm going to be the king one day, and we can build our thing together." Princess and prince are very much like starting a family together, right? Knight and damsel are very much like young, in your 20s, kind of getting out there. Then prince and princess, the prince, "I'll give you a family. I'll give you this. See how the money I have and this." He's trying to impress, to turn her into a princess so they can become prince and princess with their family. Then that evolves to king and queen, where once you've done that thing, then the man becomes the king, where he's not doing things just to get the, to get the approval of a princess, and also the queen is fully embodied, where she's not looking to be impressed by a knight, by a prince who shows up to try to impress her. So at the king and queen stage, the queen sees through the games of the prince and isn't impressed by man trying to impress her. And the king also sees through the games of the princess, because again, the princess also plays little games to see how many hoops the prince will jump through. So if you get, for example, a king who sees a woman and he has the projection that, "Oh, I found my queen." Again, we're back to the projection now and how the relationship works. "Oh, I found my queen." And he goes and he acts like a king, which isn't to do anything to impress, but just to share. Because once you become the king and queen, you're not involved with others or in relationship or in engagements to get from others. You're in them to give and to share. The king has so much, it's like the sun. There's so much abundance. He wants to share it with someone. The only thing the king asked is that it's appreciated. Now, not in some weird way, but just that it's reflected back. That the the queen, who is beautiful and represents those refined, beautiful, sort of classy, sort of evolved feminine qualities, that he has the beautiful queen with him, and she likes what he wants to give. And she reflects that beauty back. That's all the king wants. He doesn't want to get. All the queen wants is to have the king, this bastion of masculine power, give that attention. Give that attention. She's not necessarily trying or thinking that, "Oh, I'm going to make him a king," or "I'm going to change him," or "I have to do this stuff to him." She knows that doesn't really work. So when people get to that king and queen, that sovereign stage, they've kind of worked through defining themselves by the other person's approval and all that other stuff. And they just want to find a complementary. So at any stage, the king or the queen, let's just use the example of the king. A king finds this woman who he's just really captivated with, and he really, imagines it will be great that she looks like a queen. And he starts to give what the king would give, but then she's not yet at the queen stage. She's going to respond to the king. If she's still in the princess stage, it's going to look a lot like a prince trying to impress her. And so she's going to be in her role as a princess and be like, "Oh, well, jump through some hoops. Da, 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 da." And the king, because he's a king, he's been through that stage. Just like I said, the knight trying to impress the princess isn't going to work. The princess trying to get the king to act like a prince isn't going to work either. It'll work a little bit, but he's going to see very quickly, because he's been through that stage, that she's still in the princess stage and he wants a queen. So he'll try, but then once it gets to be too much little games or whatever the things are that the princess is still doing, he'll just withdraw. Now, he might come back later and say, "I wonder if she's become a queen yet," and he'll try again. And they're like, "That's still this again." Same is true with the queen. Let's say the queen projects onto some man that she really likes, right? And she's like, "Oh, this would be great." But then she sees that he's just a prince trying to impress her. Well, once the woman becomes the queen, she's also not impressed by the prince trying to impress her. I'm using this as an example because it's a great metaphor for how we have projections and we have stories around all of this. Stories. Now, it doesn't mean that we outgrow these stories entirely. And what's recently happened with this, with this recent lunar eclipse that happened in Pisces is a lot of these illusions got really fired up, right? Whether they're romantic or maybe it's with a career, maybe it's something else, but you can see it in the romantic pretty easily because we have so many projections and so many illusions and all these stories. So it's very easy for either the queen or the king or this one or that one to get in this whole story about why this thing isn't happening, instead of just recognizing what's going on and being very sort of practical, very clear, and realizing and making peace on a very practical level, because again, Virgo is ruled by Mercury. It's where Mercury is exalted. And just realizing that whatever's going on, that story in my head that I'm telling myself, that I'm using to go round and round and round and kind of rationalize, like I said at the beginning, many times in the face of disappointment, again, this is a big Pisces theme, in the face of disappointment, we have this story. And so we stay stuck in it. We can stay stuck in this dynamic between Pisces and Virgo. This Pisces-Virgo dynamic is a bunch of stories to try to explain my deep disappointment with something, right? My deep disappointment with something. So I have this story. Maybe it's this, and we analyze to death. Like I said, I gave up years ago trying to figure out why the things were happening, and trying to analyze and figure out, what does it really mean? What does she really mean? Because again, this is kind of the thing where when women are at a younger stage, especially like the princess or maybe the damsel as well, and sometimes even the queen, we play these games. We can play these little games, right? So you got to test and see, are we just playing a little game? Are we having fun? Are we having fun, or are we at a different level? But trying to figure out, and for women too, to try to figure out what the man really means and what does it all mean. It's not just we figure out what does it all mean, but we figure out what does it all mean based on what I want. And we use the Mercury end. We use our stories. We concoct a story that keeps us in this dynamic. And we interpret things that are they might even be very much against what we want, but we interpret them to somehow mean what we do want. Like let's say one person might be totally uninterested in the other one and they say it. But the person who is still interested might just tell themselves a bunch of stories. Well, if I just keep doing this, maybe he'll be interested or maybe she'll be interested. And we tell ourselves this story about what the things really mean. Driven by our projections, driven by what we want, because we sense that other person, again, it's why it's easy with relationships, we sense that merging with that person is going to be a merging with my divinity. Because that's what Pisces represents, and it's also what the opposite represents. The hardest thing for a man who has been incarnated in a male body is to naturally access the soft, gentle, loving, sweet energy of the female. Also, the hardest thing for the female who's been incarnated in a female body is to naturally just sort of incarnate that clarity, strength, certainty, and, you would say, sort of power and courage of the masculine. And there's a sense that integrating that is like completion. It feels like the soul completing itself. And it does, because a lot of what we're trying to do is to reconcile the duality of existence in this lifetime. And this is especially poignant now when we have eclipses. We're going to have the lunar eclipse is going to take place in Aries. But not only that, the nodes are about to change signs. So this is also a huge prelude to what's going to be happening in the next month and a half when Rahu goes into Pisces, where he'll be for the next year and a half, and Ketu goes into Virgo for the next year and a half. So this thing I'm describing right now, this getting the story straight, working through our projections and our illusions, isn't just an eclipse thing. I've been saying for months that this eclipse is the precursor of a gigantic shift that's happening along Virgo and Pisces. And so you may have really just felt in the last couple weeks or so a lot of illusions conjured up after that full moon that we had in Pisces. And now after this eclipse, maybe some real focus and insight on seeing through those illusions and getting the story straight. Like, no, you're just filling your own head full of a lot of illusions. Instead, bring your energy into the moment. bring your energy into the power of that Virgo principle, which is about managing your habits, routines, this moment, and all of that stuff, rather than projecting it out into some illusory connection or whatever it is. Get that story straight. And I thought of this sort of evolution of male and female, and the masculine and feminine, as being very poignant example of this. I don't know if you're feeling this. I've definitely been feeling this in the last week or so, where there's been quite a bit of sort of bubbling around this. And since the eclipse, I've been feeling a lot more clear about certain parts of my life where this has happened. Some of them are actually personal and relationship oriented, but others are about the relationships and some of the frustrations I have maybe around work and other things. So I hope this was helpful for you. If it has been, share it with others. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.